Hi, I'm Tom Drost, president of Logical Engine, the creators of EstimateRocket and JobRocket. EstimateRocket is a cloud-based mobile and desktop software that enables service contractors to manage projects from lead to paid. JobRocket's a manpower planning and scheduling tool that works hand-in-hand with EstimateRocket once you land the projects. It's a must for customers managing multiple crews and forecasting manpower months into the future. Okay, there's our pitch. All right, so today's webinar topic is change orders and deposit and progress invoices with EstimateRocket. So not so long ago, we introduced a couple new features to EstimateRocket that allow you to do both online acceptance for your projects, and in addition to that, to be able to create change orders that can also be accepted by the clients. And we introduced deposit and progress invoices. And we're going to cover both of those features today. And so first what I'm going to do is talk about change orders. So a little while ago today, I created a project and I made it for one of my favorite people, my Star Wars hero. And there it is. I'm going to schedule work for it. So once I go into that project, I did accept it already. So I previously created a proposal. The client accepted it. I am going to take a look at the notes. This little flag on your saved proposals is an indicator that the client left you a note, so you can always check that and see what they sent back to you. Those notes will also appear in the email confirmation you get from an accepted proposal as well. So in this case, the client said, "Can you also add power washing the driveway?" So this would be a great time for a change order. So the client has accepted the proposal that we originally sent them, and now we want to actually add a change order before we even start the project in this case. But of course we could do this at any point in time throughout the life cycle of the project. So I'm just going to add a new line item, and I happen to have a template set up for this. And I'm going to use a neat feature of the item templates, which we've covered in another webinar. And I'm going to create a group name for this. And I'm going to say power washing. And I'm going to power wash, another, let's say it's 900 square feet. And I'll show you how this is going to work in a second. All right, so all that was the equivalent of creating a line item as you would create a normal line item. And the description of that line item is power washing. And it has a little internal description as well, and it's change order number. And the group down below, which is kind of the key here, is called change order number 1. The group name, if you haven't used them, gives you the ability to group your items and potentially to get subtotals for those groups and give you some other controls over the groups. It is also what's used to drive the change order capability, which you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to say prepare. I'm going to change the description a little bit. Requested additional, good thing for spell check, additional power washing service for driveway. There we go. And as I said, we already created this as a change order in the change order number 1 group. It already happens to have some unit pricing and the quantity we entered on the template. So I'm going to save that. And as you can see, this is in its own group. And one of the things that I mentioned about the groups, if you haven't used them, is the groups is what give you the control over what things display under various scenarios. So I actually am going to turn on the group total because I do want to see the total for this group, for this change order, and I'm going to just turn off line item unit prices and quantities. And you'll see that'll change the look of this just a little bit. Now, I could also add additional line items into this change order group. I can have 1 or 100 line items in there because the change order capability is based on a whole group at a time. So if I did have additional line items, they would go out as part of this group. I'm just going to do 1 for now. So once I've created my line item group and I gave it a name of change order 1, just so the customer would know what it was, then the next thing I can do is create a change order proposal for it. And to do that, if you look down a little bit lower, we have the Proposals Plus button. I'm going to go ahead and click that. and it comes up with the default option, which is estimate. So in many cases, you're building the initial estimate for the client. In this case, we already actually have an estimate accepted. What we want to do is a change order. So I'm going to select the change order indicator or radio group, and then I'm going to pick the group that I want in my change order. And you can clearly see it's change order number 1 is $450. And that's it. And that's how easy it is to create a change order. You'll notice that it's created a new active proposal, so that's available for the client to accept. And at this point, we'll take a quick look at what that looks like in the customer portal. So this is what the customer is going to see when they pull up the customer portal. They've got a change order active and pending, which they could then accept. And then the rest of the information for the project is down here if they wanted to look at previously accepted projects or previously accepted documents. All right, so we've got that proposal out. We have some options on proposals. In addition to looking at it in the customer portal, we can also email it to the client, which is what we're going to actually do next. The other thing you can do, which some of you may have noticed and some of you may have accidentally used, is there's an accept without signature and a reject proposal. So accept without signature is available on either an initial proposal or on an change order proposal. And basically what that means is the customer said, hey, I accept, and you need to get the proposal accepted. So you can click accept without signature, and it just indicates that the client never signed it, but that the proposal has been accepted. So generally speaking, you only want to use that when someone's given you a verbal okay, or they've sent you an email indicating that it was okay to proceed. In this case, we're just going to email out this proposal. And so I've got a change order email, and it's going to go out to a couple of recipients here, and these actually both happen to be me, so I'm going to get rid of one. And in this case, we're using the web portal link, as opposed to including the PDF. I'm just going to go ahead and send that. So that's on its way out to the client, and of course we can actually go look at that, and you'll notice that we do have the link in there. So when we do want to check this on the web portal, we can actually use this link if we want to go see what it looks like, or we can use the link from the drop down that we did before. Okay, so we've now emailed out our change order proposal, but the customer also accepted it. So we're gonna let that change order proposal sit out there for a few minutes, and in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to go on and create a deposit invoice. The client accepted the proposal. We have a standard policy of asking for a deposit invoice for the project. Before I get into that, I just want to note that when we created that change order proposal, the change order 1 group got excluded from the project. And what happens is when you create the change order proposal, it excludes the group. When the client accepts it, as you'll see later, it's actually going to include the group back into the project. So it automatically excludes it until the client accepts it. We'll come back to that in a moment. All right, back to our deposit invoice. So at this point, we want to send out a deposit invoice to the client, and to do that, we can use the Invoices Plus option. So I'm going to say Invoices Plus, and we've got some built-in descriptions here. We can do a deposit, progress, or you can type in your own description. So we're going to say deposit invoice, and I'm going to actually ask them for 20%, so I'm just going to add that to the name. And this is what's going to appear in the deposit or progress invoice. So in this case, so far all we've got is a name, which is similar to a line item name. We may also want to add some more detailed description if needed. You could put something in here to the effect of, required deposit to schedule your project or something to that effect. So if you do feel like you need more description in there, you can feel free to add some descriptive text here in the description field. Now, we've got a couple of options in how we create the deposit or progress invoices. And the default is the remaining amount of the project. Well, we don't really want to do that. What we want to do is make it for 20% of the total. So I can select the percent of total, type in 20 next to that, and it automatically calculates out the subtotal, any tax amount, and the total amount for that invoice, for that deposit invoice. Now, you also have the option to do a custom amount. A custom amount simply lets you override and put in whatever values you want for your invoice. You don't have to do it based on a calculation. I'm going to leave it just as percent of total, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. So now that I've created an invoice for the customer, I've created a deposit invoice, the next thing we probably want to do is send it out to the client. So you'll notice I have a little drop-down gear menu next to the invoice I just created. We drop that down, and we've got quite a few options here. We can view the invoice, we can email it out, we can see what it looks like on the customer portal, we can edit it if we need to, we can close it. Closing it just means it's the equivalent of marking it as paid or indicating that it's not going to be paid at some point in the future. And we can also delete the invoice. So invoices you can pretty freely add and delete if you need to. But bear in mind that what shows up in your invoices list is what is populating your sales reports. So sales now in EstimateRocket are all driven off of invoices. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So at this point, I want to go ahead and email out the invoice. And again, I've actually created some additional templates. So I've got an invoice deposit template. It just reads a little bit differently than the other template does, so it's a better indicator of how we want to present this to the client. So I'm going to go ahead and send that out. So now we've emailed out our deposit invoice, and we're ready to move on with our project. We might schedule it now. We might wait until we get payment for it, and then we'll proceed. Okay. So we've got our deposit invoice done and sent, and we reviewed the options that we have available for it. We can also actually accept that payment via the new credit card option in EstimateRocket using the portal. So if anybody has an interest in that or any questions about that, certainly you can ask at the end of the session. So what I want to do next is to actually take a look at our change order and go back to that. So we've got this excluded change order, which they do want, in fact, to do. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to go out and accept it. So we're going to jump over to the customer portal and just refresh that. And you'll notice that there's now an unpaid invoice there. If you were using credit card processing, you'd have a Pay Now button available to you where the customer could actually put in their credit card and pay the invoice online. But they also have a pending change order. So we're going to click on the pending change order. The customer can read it, see exactly what the details are and what the total is. And you actually do get a separate set of terms and conditions that you can use for change orders as well. So if you want to have a different set of terms and conditions, you can set those up in your document templates. So I'm going to click I agree to pay, and it's going to give me the chance to sign my name, as you've probably seen before. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to accept that proposal. And of course I can leave some notes if I want to, but I'm just going to go ahead and accept it. So now we've still got an unpaid invoice that we want them to pay, but we've got two approved. We've got an estimate and a change order approved in the client's document history, so they can go back and see what they approved, and you'll notice that their signatures are on those as well. So in this particular case, they've still got that invoice out there, which we'll visit again in a moment. So now I'm going to go back to my project, and I'm just going to click the refresh button so we get updates. So I no longer have any active proposals. My change order has in fact been approved. One other little note in terms of the proposals is there's a little info button near each of the proposals when they're accepted. And so what you can do is basically that will show you the IP address that they accepted it from and the date and time stamp that it was accepted. So that's just a historical record that we keep to indicate, where the proposal was accepted from, just in case you ever have any, questions or disputes or anything where you've got to reconcile that. Okay, so we've by accepting that change order, one of the things I want you to notice is that it automatically included change order 1 back into the project total now for you. So that's one of the byproducts of the change orders. It will automatically include it into the project total once the client accepts. So it makes it really easy to process that and to get that included in your project. All right, So we've looked at a couple things now. We've done deposit invoice. We have created change order, and we had originally created an estimate proposal and an invoice. So we can also, during the course of the project at any time, use the Payment Plus and create a payment. So if you do have an invoice already created, it's going to present that invoice to you to select for payment. So you can either just say no invoice and enter the amount they paid, or ideally what you do want to do is pay off the specific invoices. And the reason for that is that's going to actually mark that invoice as paid, as you'll see in one moment. So I'm going to say it was paid with check, and I could leave some additional notes, and I'm going to save that. So once I save it, now it shows me that it was paid, shows me the history, the reference of the check, and it also shows me the total project due based on what's been paid so far. So it really just keeps everything about the project up to date. So what else can we do? The next thing that we might want to do is, during the course of the project, if it's a little longer running project, we may want to do a progress invoice. And it's basically the same process that we used for the deposit invoice. And we just click on Invoices Plus at any time. It pulls up our dialog. We give it a name. We can say Progress Invoice, and I might say it's 50% complete. And we give it a description. Still can't type as fast as the computer. And then we're going to say what's our percent of total, and I can put in that we want 50% more, and it calculates out the amount for me. And again, I could also use a custom amount and just enter whatever dollar amount I wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And there we've now created another invoice for the customer, which also is marked as unpaid. And I'm just going to click over on the Customer Portal tab again and refresh that, and you'll see that the original invoice now has been marked as paid, and then we have a new unpaid invoice sitting out there, waiting in the customer portal. So again, we'd want to email this invoice to the customer so that they get a record of it, which is basically just going to have, again, a link to their customer portal so they can go look it up. And in this case, I actually have that included as well. I also can I do have a second template here that I have for progress payments that I set up, and we can go ahead and send that out. All right. So what's the final piece in the puzzle here? Well, what happens as the project winds down and we get towards completion of the project, we're usually going to be left with some sort of an amount, remaining amount due. So our project was originally for a total of $1,407.50. So far, we haven't invoiced that complete amount yet. We've only invoiced part of that amount. So what we want to do at this point is, the project's wrapping up, we actually want to issue an invoice for the balance. Now, in this case, we've created invoices for more than we've been paid for so far, so we may or may not have already received an invoice, a payment for that second invoice. That's sort of to be determined. But at this point, if we go to the project and we say that the work is, we mark it as complete work because we're done with the project. And at this point, we could create an invoice for the balance, but it's actually even easier just to click the Mark Invoice as Sent, which you may have two options here. Your button may say Mark Invoice as Sent, or it may say Complete Invoice. Either one will do the same thing. Complete Invoice is newer signups, but Mark Invoice as Sent will in fact look at all the invoices that have been generated, and it will create an invoice for the balance. So we will now have a total number of invoices. You'll see it created one more invoice for $512.25, which happens to be the total amount that had not yet been invoiced. So it makes it very easy to create that last invoice for the total of the sale simply by marking that Complete Invoice button or Mark Invoice as Paid button. So just keep that in mind when you're getting to that point in the project. Now, one other thought to keep in mind, and we get this question a lot, is what if the customer What if the customer wasn't going to pay the full amount, or we're going to give them a discount or a credit? If you need to do that towards the end of the project, what we recommend is before creating that final invoice, you create a line item that represents whatever the credit or discount amount is going to be for that client. So by doing that, you'll get the final balance or a final total invoice amount of the project to the correct amount that you're expecting to be paid. And then when you create that final invoice, it'll create it for that correct balance. So you won't, that'll include the value of that credit, and you document that credit for or discount amount in a line item in the project, so it's very clear when you're looking at the whole project total what it represents. So just a thought in terms of handling that. We do get that question on a pretty frequent basis. So at this point, we've got all our invoices cleaned up. We need to add a couple more payments to finish it off. We've got a final invoice and a progress invoice. So let's pay off the progress invoice. And that takes care of that one. And then let's pay off the final invoice. You might have paid those both on the same check. It's almost easier just to click them off. You'll notice now that we've got all of our invoices are being marked as paid, which is great. So we know all our totals are correct and accurate, and that's pretty much it. At this point, we have the complete project button because we've made all our payments. And you can also see a good visual indicator up here at the top right on the project screen. We have a project total of $1,407. We've invoiced $1,407.50, and we've been paid $1,407.50. So you know when those three totals are the same, that your project is in balance and in good standing, and you are ready to mark it as complete. So that's basic discussion today for change orders and progress and deposit invoices and even final invoices. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I hope that was useful and helpful. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for attending our EstimateRocket change orders, deposits, and progress invoices webinar. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks a lot for coming, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.